Before getting started here, I just want to make a brief note that I am not an expert in any way in the Australian political process and how laws are created in that country. So if I am a little off on certain things or not quite accurate in how I'm reporting aspects of this, give me a little latitude, just because I don't really know how it works in the same way that I understand the system of my own home country, which is the United States of America. But as you can see here, the new Australia hate crimes bill is in the news in the past couple days because they have made a significant change to it involving mandatory jail sentences for violations of this bill. This is the Criminal Code Amendment Hate Crimes Bill of 2025. And you can see from the history that it was first introduced in September of 2024. This is from The Guardian. The Albanese government will attempt to pass minimum jail sentences of between 1 and 6 years for hate speech crimes in a bid to stave off opposition attacks on its response to anti-Semitism before the federal election. The move marks a significant departure from Labor's own national policy platform, which opposes minimum sentencing laws, which it says do not reduce crime, lead to unjust outcomes, and are often discriminatory in practice. So the policy platform of the political party that's doing this in Australia is generally against mandatory sentencing laws. And in this case, they're saying, oh no, we're going to make an exception to that. In a late-night debate on Wednesday, the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke introduced amendments to the Criminal Code Amendment, also known as the Hate Crimes Bill, that would enable minimum jail sentences for threatening force or violence against people on the basis of their race, religion, nationality, national or ethnic origin, political opinion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and intersex status. Burke described the proposed changes as the toughest laws Australia has ever had against hate crimes. Anybody who says that hate speech is somehow a subset of freedom of speech doesn't understand that words can be bullets. This is the most dangerous sentence I have ever read as it relates to the future of this world. This is the narrative that will be used in the future in the United States of America to try and get around the First Amendment. Whether they do that through a bill like this in the United States Congress eventually, or they actually try to pass some kind of amendment to the Constitution that will somehow negate the First Amendment in certain ways along these lines, it would be like a hate crime amendment to the United States Constitution that would have this same effect. And that use of the phrase words can be bullets is very carefully chosen because it also relates to the idea that foreign entities are using free speech to destabilize democracy. This is the other narrative that they are using, and in that context, they refer to it as a virtual battlefield, which again is very similar to the idea of words being bullets. They're crafting this idea in the mind that some kind of exception should exist for this dangerous form of speech, this dangerous rise in hate. And hate is very broad in how it can be interpreted, and of course, the definition of hate is very elusive. Anything could be construed as hate from a certain perspective if you frame it in a certain way. The amendments will create minimum mandatory jail sentences of 12 months for less serious threats of violence, such as Nazi salutes, while offenses associated with listed terrorist groups could carry a minimum jail sentence of 6 years. And you can see why they have engaged in this domestic terrorist narrative. The creation of the idea of the domestic terrorist was done so that a law like this can be passed that involves both speech and political organizations. You create this idea of the anti-Semitic, racist conspiracy theorist. You merge that with far-right white nationalists. And then you further merge that with legitimate political parties in these countries, or at least they used to be legitimate in the past. And as I said, in the United States, this was the Republican Party, the Conservative Party. You have your agents and assets start to talk about the fringe conspiracy theories online. If you were looking into these things on the internet, if you considered yourself familiar with these kinds of things, you were aware of them, you don't necessarily label yourself as anything, but they would call you a conspiracy theorist because of what information you acquired through this process. All of a sudden, you're witnessing mainstream political assets like Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh in the United States of America discussing fringe conspiracy theories that used to only be talked about on the internet. All of a sudden, characters like Ron Paul are repeating phrases from G. Edward Griffin's book and Eustace Mullins material. Bernie Sanders, on the other side, is talking about similar things in a different way, bringing in a different demographic. Then Donald Trump does what he was supposed to do. He subsumes a lot of this conspiracy culture and turns it into a partisan thing, where it's alleging Democrats in the deep state are doing this. And by engaging in this strategy, you bring in normal people to conspiracy culture. And you can point at them and say, look, this is a problem. This is a rise in domestic terrorism now because these ordinary people are repeating things that we know lead to radicalization and acting out in violent ways. We see this through 4chan and school shootings. We see this with January 6th. Ordinary people engaged in an insurrection against democracy. They engaged in violent acts. This is the danger of conspiracy theories. This is the danger in the rise in hate. We must do something about this. They are freely able to talk about it online, right? And as Donald Trump rises, you have this whole scripted conservative online movement led by Joe Rogan and all the clones of him that are connected into this podcast scene where they're all talking about similar subjects and leading the ideological revolution along these lines, making it popular to believe these things, making it mainstream to believe a lot of these things, so that they can come around like they are doing in Australia now and say, look, there is a massive rise in hate. Look at all these different examples of hate. We need to do something about this. We need to pass a hate crime bill. And now they are going to the extreme in Australia, or at least trying to. They have introduced this idea. We'll see if it eventually passes in the bill, where it is now a mandatory 1-year jail sentence if you do a Nazi salute or something similar along those lines. And I hope you see, this is why they spent all those years associating Donald Trump and now Elon Musk with Nazis. That's why Elon Musk did that salute. Okay? They're trying to create this idea of the rise in hate because they want to censor it. They need the plausible, quote-unquote, facts to point to and say, look, here's another example, and here's another example. These unelected Nazis in the United States government, these fascists, like Hitler was, are trying to engage in a coup. They did it through free speech on the internet. This is how it all started. We must do something about this. In doing this, by creating this artificial rise of the far right, the rise in hate, merging it with all the mainstream conservative movements in all of these different countries, you create the thing through which world government can come into existence. Because all of this opposition to everything that will represent and be is classified as a form of domestic terrorism. And then you pass all these terrorism laws that will send people to jail eventually if they're repeating these ideas. So that when it's all said and done, the thing that you bring into existence will be impossible to criticize. You see, it'll be impossible to go against the one party that runs the world in all the different countries. It's just the party, as they told you in 1984. And the opposition is controlled in this way, as we're seeing in real time, to create this idea that it is a form of domestic terrorism. It is a form of hate that's rising. And as a response to that artificial rise that you created in the first place, through your own agents and assets, you create the foundation that you need to eventually make what they're saying illegal. Or else somebody will go to jail if they mimic it in any way. And in that context, it's the literal boot stomping on people's faces for the rest of time, right? There's nothing you can do. Now, in the United States of America, this is not possible yet because of the First Amendment. And that's why I am dying on this hill, okay? This is the thing that we all need to be paying attention to. Don't get sucked into all the artificial divisions that they have put out there for you guys. This is the thing you must pay attention to. Do not let your energy be sucked into the thing that is going to create a response that will allow the First Amendment to be changed. We have more of a duty than ever to be vigilant along these lines in the United States of America based on what they are doing in all the other countries around the world along these lines. We are the last stand of free speech, okay? This is very important. It's not a game. And of course, there will be many fake characters like Elon Musk who will claim to be about free speech. That's always how it is, right? The controlled opposition pretends to be something that they are not. They pretend to support the thing that is true, and then through all of their actions actually remove it in the process. That's how it works. And that's what he is, that's what Donald Trump is, that's what all of these characters are. Going back to the last video, do you think it's an accident now that so many of these characters are being painted as anti-Semitic or somehow racist or hateful? Do you think it's an accident that they speak like they do so that that idea can be created in the mind that they are some kind of evil person that just doesn't get it? Hate symbols and terror offenses will be punishable with mandatory jail terms ranging from 1 to 6 years in Australia after Parliament passed a series of amendments to hate crime laws on Thursday. The new laws were passed following a wave of high-profile anti-Semitic attacks, which have become a major topic of debate in the country. Under the amendments, displaying hate symbols or performing a Nazi salute is now punishable with at least 1 year in prison. Other penalties include a minimum of 3 years for financing terrorism and 6 years for committing or planning terrorist attacks. Now again, what is the definition of terrorism? In the past, a law like this wouldn't really concern you because it would involve the traditional idea of a foreign terrorist from another country planning and orchestrating an attack on a different country's soil. But now you see, through the changed definition of terrorism to domestic terrorism, these terrorist laws apply to regular citizens in their own country. And it's a very intentional merger of the idea of terrorism with hate crimes, because this is all one coordinated agenda that is designed to censor speech eventually. I mean, they're doing it in real time now in Australia, but I mean that eventually in terms of what will transpire in the United States. There have been several attacks on Jewish targets in Australia in recent months. Last week, authorities in Sydney found a caravan containing explosives and an anti-Semitic note. The discovery came just a week after a child care center near a Jewish school and synagogue in Sydney was set on fire, and anti-Semitic graffiti was seen on one of its walls. Now, this is wild to me because they're using all of this as the primary basis for changing the law. And if you remember, there was the article that just came out around the same time that anti-Semitic crimes may be funded overseas, say Australian police. Australia's federal police have said they are investigating whether overseas actors or individuals are paying local criminals to carry out anti-Semitic crimes in the country. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called a snap cabinet meeting in response where officials agreed to set up a national database to track anti-Semitic incidents. Thus far, the Federal Police Task Force, set up in December to investigate such incidents, received more than 166 reports of anti-Semitic crimes. Albanese said it appeared some of the crimes were being perpetrated by people who don't have a particular issue, aren't motivated by an ideology, but are paid actors. Now, it's unclear who or where the payments are coming from. So, these could be payments coming from people that want the idea of the rise in anti-Semitism to become a thing, okay? Just as easily as it could be other sources that are genuinely anti-Semitic and want to do these things in other countries. The point is, this is unsettled. The police don't know who exactly is making the payments, but they have evidence, or this article wouldn't be out here, that such payments are being made, which draws into question this whole quote-unquote wave of attacks that Australia is experiencing. But the politicians don't wait. They don't wait for the investigation to be concluded. They immediately level it up and pass new amendments that will make jail time mandatory for doing these things. In this connection, I hope you guys can see how the rollback of quote-unquote woke policies that is occurring in the United States of America right now through Donald Trump and his whole cabinet, everything he has put together, or everything they put together through him and attribute to Donald Trump, that whole thing is designed to create the conditions for the rise in hate to become more obvious. Temporarily rolling these policies back so people can quote-unquote freely speak their mind along these lines, which will add to the idea that these things are only further rising. Oh, we didn't really know how bad it was until now. This is the same reason why those protests on college campuses in the United States of America that were allegedly anti-Semitic were funded by the same people that fund everything else. They created those protests so that they could point to them as evidence of the rise in hate. All of these articles are focusing on the idea that since October 7th, there's been a massive further rise in anti-Semitism, which is lumped into the idea of the massive rise in hate. Look at all of Donald Trump's policies. He's so against people that don't see themselves as male or female. They have these gender fluid ideas. Donald Trump is against them. It's a rise in hate. We need to do something about this. It's the exact same formula that they used with the war on terror. 9/11 creates the reaction necessary to go to war and have the war on terror. This is events that are transpiring in a different way now that is creating the justification for the war on domestic terror. And the domestic terrorists are you and I. You see, the domestic terrorists now are regular people. And just like the war on terror functioned as it related to passing laws like the Patriot Act, this will be done in a similar way to pass the Digital Patriot Act. No more anonymity on the internet because free speech has created the unacceptable rise in hate. Social credit score, the whole thing. Everything attached to you. Because then, if a bill like the one in Australia exists, but even worse than that, and you say one thing that is mandatory jail sentence, well, that goes on the blockchain immediately. You're flagged by the AI, and you're just sent to jail by a drone, maybe. It comes and rips you out of your house, Minority Report style. Something along those lines, though, right? The police are immediately dispatched as soon as you say it, or you like a certain thing on the internet, right? Oh, they like that story. That's hate speech. Jail. This is real stuff, man. This is coming if we allow it. And I'm hesitant to even make videos like this because I know all the usual suspects like Alex Jones and David Icke will be making similar videos as controlled opposition to pollute the waters of who are the people actually saying stuff like this? Who are the people explaining the agenda as it's going on? And I don't want to be lumped in with them by discussing the same thing, but this is just one of those examples where it must be discussed no matter what they try to do to it after the fact in terms of distorting it or making it seem exactly like I'm referring to it here as some kind of domestic terrorist narrative. Oh, look, they're out there talking about how this is dangerous because they're a part of the rise in hate. Or they're just those conspiracy theorists who don't know anything and they repeat all this disinformation that's been debunked many times over. Anyways, that's it for this one. Later.